You know, this is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
Welcome on in to your Sunrise Book Club. Today, we're continuing our journey with American Cosmic, UFOs, Religion, and Technology by the great DW Pasulka. If you've been with us on the book club, you've read Encounters with Us, also by DW, which is a book focused on encounters top-level scientists have had with entities from beyond the pale. I'm talking scientists who reach into the other side to get information, others who've been abducted by aliens, others who've had experiences with electric raccoons. But that's Encounters. That's her second book. American Cosmic is about her journey into the world of ufology. She's a PhD of religious studies, and slowly through her own study of ancient paranormal happenings with nuns and priests and all that, and monks and all that, she finds a fine line of what would be considered now alien abductions or encounters and UFO sightings. So it gets her into the world of UFOs. While she's doing this research, she meets a dude named Tyler D. That's who we're going to meet today. Tyler D is not his real name. It's a pseudonym. He won't use his real name because he's a top-level NASA scientist. He's had an experiment on every single space shuttle launch since the Challenger. He's like a special little baby boy at NASA, and they protect him. He doesn't watch, like, we'll learn all about his methods as we read, but he's a very unique guy who claims to be in contact with off-world entities. He also holds several hundred biomedical patents with stuff that we actually still use. It helps us. So the dude's just like a hidden genius. That's who we're meeting today. He's taking DW and a colleague deep into the desert, a site of an infamous 1947 crash. Could it be Roswell? That's what we'll find out. Note, though, with Tyler D and anyone you're working with who works with the government, his handlers know what he's telling DW. He's not revealing anything that's not okayed. If not, that doesn't have the stamp of approval from the man behind the man. So, the invisible Tyler D. We start each chapter with a quote. This one is from the great book Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. The first rule of Fight Club is. I mean, that just alludes to the order of secrecy. We've read in other books about, I think it was Encounters, scientists who study this phenomena, aliens and UFOs and shit. They have a policy called pencils up. The information lives up here. They don't write anything down at certain levels. I'm talking like, in secret, the secret stuff. Journey to the desert. You need to wear a blindfold. Tyler's voice was calm but firm. His southern accent took a bit of the hard edge off of the statement. But James and I had got the message. It was time to put on our blindfolds. This was one of the conditions which we had agreed. We were to wear a blindfold for the last 40 minutes of the car ride so we wouldn't be able to see where or how we arrived. I had come to call the destination, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, the sacred place. It was not Area 51, I was told, but it was a place in New Mexico under a no-fly zone. And it was supposedly a location where one could find artifacts of an extraterrestrial aerial craft that had crashed in 1947. Roswell. As a professor of religious studies, this was outside my usual research territory, but not by much. The study of religion can get pretty weird. I called this a sacred place because it marked the location of where it is believed that non-human intelligence revealed itself to humans. In my field, the word that describes this kind of event is hierophany. A hierophany is a manifestation of the sacred. It occurs when a non-human intelligent being descends from the sky to the ground, or otherwise reveals itself. The burning bush that Moses witnessed on Mount Sinai as recorded in the Bible, is a classic example of a hierophany. Locations like Roswell, New Mexico function as a sacred place or site of these events to millions of people who believe in extraterrestrials. It is a destination that also happens to be teeming with kitschy shops where tourists and pilgrims can purchase UFO memorabilia. There is a museum that is dedicated to the topic of UFOs, restaurants serve UFO-themed food, and the town hosts an annual 4-day UFO festival. Ooh, now that. Someone take me. A carnival-like atmosphere is common to many sacred pilgrimage sites. A similar atmosphere can be found in the town of Lourdes, France. In 1858, according to the Catholics, the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to a young girl, Bernadette, and a spring of water miraculously flowed from the ground. Today, millions of people journey to the spring at Lourdes to buy water, statues, and other sacred memorabilia. One can purchase Virgin Mary-themed food and drinks, as well as books and pamphlets describing the events of the miracle. Where hierophanies appear, consumerism often follows. Well, we love to buy merch. I want some Virgin Mary merch from Lourdes. To be clear, to suggest that the location to which we were headed in New Mexico functioned as a site of a hierophany is an interpretation. It is my interpretation. The site held no sacred value for me, although this has changed. Skeptic to believer, the classic story. Reminds me of old Dr. Mack, psychiatrist, 40 years, Harvard trained. Then he starts studying alien abduction, becomes a true believer. DW, same thing. She gets to go to the Roswell crash site. And at first, of course, she's like a non-believer. So she's just there to see how her colleagues react. But then my intention was to document how this site in New Mexico functioned as a sacred site for others, particularly the two scientists with whom I was traveling. My research partner was James Master, one of the world's leading scientists and a professor at a major research university. For him, our destination was a place where a non-human aerial craft had potentially landed. If artifacts could be found, he believed he could show this had truly happened. Tyler, our host, shared his belief. Tyler believed that this was one of the most significant locations in the history of humanity, and he explained that only a handful of people had been there. I was more interested in observing how James and Tyler, the two most intelligent and successful people I'd ever met, understood the event and the artifacts, then in whether the artifacts were in fact of non-human origin. At this point in the story, that was my position. For Tyler and James, this was a monumentous occasion that was also, perhaps ironically, marked by the appearance of a giant gleaming rainbow in the sky. As I pointed out to my distracted partners, "Wow," Tyler said as he glimpsed the rainbow. He looked over at me suspiciously, as if I had somehow conjured it. So here we have a non-believer with two believers out in the middle of the desert at the supposed Roswell crash site. One of them, Tyler, works for NASA and knows this is a legit place where the UFO crash landed. The other is collecting samples, James Masters, to prove that this is a UFO, so the masses, us, the people, John Q. Public, will finally open our eyes and just believe. And the third is our author, DW, current skeptic. Even though Tyler's like, this is a place very few people have ever been. It's a no-fly zone out somewhere in New Mexico. They had to be blindfolded to go there. She's like not even taking that in. She's like, I wonder how these two scientists will react to being at a sacred place, being a religious studies professor. James and I fitted the blindfolds over our eyes, an awkward moment for all three of us, or so I thought. Later I learned, because he showed me the pictures, that Tyler had photographed me and James in our blindfolds. He started the car and we jolted forward. I was riding in the front passenger seat, and as Tyler drove, we all rocked to and fro, back and forth, over what had to be a gravel road. We drove for 40 minutes and joked about various things, none of which had to do with the reason for our journey. I was nervous, mostly because I couldn't see where I was going. But I was also nervous because I could feel the expectation in the air. James was driving to get his hands on any potential artifacts. the alleged pieces of the crashed craft to study them. And Tyler was almost giddy that he was bringing two people to the site who might help shed light on what he believed was advanced technology that could potentially help humans in significant ways through either bio or aerial technologies. I had made it clear that I wasn't going there to ascertain the truth of the event. I was going there to document the belief in extraterrestrial intelligence and the alleged artifacts. Tyler had told James and me to wear sturdy leather boots to protect our legs from rattlesnakes. The weather would be extreme, the sun would be hot, and we might get sunburned. Yet the wind chill required us to wear winter jackets. When we arrived at our destination and took off the blindfolds, I looked around and laughed at our appearance. James and I looked ridiculous in puffy jackets, tall leather boots, and cowboy hats. Tyler, though, was dressed stylishly in a jean jacket and short boots. He explained that his body temperature was naturally very warm. After we had recovered from the trip and sipped some water, Tyler configured 2 metal detectors and showed us a map of where the craft had landed. He said that when the crash occurred in 1947, the government had taken the craft, hidden it away in a secret place, and disguised the area with tin cans and debris to prevent others from finding any remaining artifacts. If you find yourself in the deserts of New Mexico, amongst a field of tin cans that appears to be there for no reason, you, my friend, might be at the Roswell crash site. Or there's no saying that they don't do this at other crash sites, because recovery teams are a real thing. And it would make sense that after you recover a craft, you just sprinkle trash everywhere. So the unsuspecting hiker or camper person who comes by, it's like, oh, this is just a trash place, let's leave. Little do they know, UFO artifacts abound. So when you're out in the desert wandering around or on a walkabout in the woods, you come across a random junk field and it makes no sense for it to be there. And do with it what you will. So cool though to walk around with the metal detector. Now it said Tyler configured the metal detectors. Does that mean that these were special detectors? I'm assuming yes. I'm assuming it's tech that we might not just have at the store. He's just not making a big deal about it. But in fact, looking around the area, it was covered with tons of tin cans. The cans were rusty and most of them had disintegrated into a powdery rubble that resembled compost. He further explained that our metal detectors were special and had been configured to identify the artifacts. He paused and surveyed the area. It was a beautiful day with few clouds. The wind whistled past us and all was silent except for its sound. We stood and looked around. There were tumbleweeds, rocks, and the rust-colored cans strewn as far as the eye could see. The landscape was eerie yet beautiful. I was drawn to one place in particular, as it looked familiar to me. It was a small mesa. Tyler noticed that I looked out in that direction several times. Do you recognize that area? What? I wasn't sure where he was going with the question. He knew I'd never been there. The scene was probably recreated in the first episode of the last season of The X-Files, he said. James and I had stood there looking at him incredulous. Yes, he continued, someone from their production team had either been here or knew someone who had. It makes me wonder if they had an insider on the team. And that makes me wonder about a scene from Billy Madison that might reveal some truth about the Sasquatch and his love for sandwiches.
I'll tell you who took those lunches. That damn Sasquatch.
Does Adam Sandler have an insider on his team as well? Also, Mirage Men, great documentary, goes over this type of thing where the truth is delved out to us, but sandwiched between a whole bunch of lies that also seem real and also seem too crazy to be real. So finding the real truth is even harder because there's literal agents within like subcultures and communities that believe in this stuff that disseminate false information along with real information. So it just drives you nuts. In the movie Mirageman, there's a real tragic tale about a guy who I believe ends up dying because he gets so paranoid about what's going on. The government basically tricks him into thinking that there's an alien invasion coming, but they're also, you know, giving him some real juice at the same time. So be careful out there. Just have a good time and believe in what you want. Don't get too serious about it, folks, please. What was already a weird occasion just got weirder. I let Tyler's statement sink in slowly. He had just said that the supposed site of a real extraterrestrial crash landing where I currently stood was featured in an opening episode of the last season of The X-Files. I silently scoffed. His statement sounded more ridiculous than James and I looked at the moment. I looked at the mesa again. It did look like the scene from the television show. It took a moment as my thoughts sped through several different steps and scenarios in an attempt to process Tyler's statement. It was data, and I felt that I shouldn't reject it outright. It was then that I felt the click of realization. This was not so surprising after all. Of course this place was mythologized in one of the most popular television shows in history. Of course it would be taken up, interpreted, and spun, and then projected to millions, perhaps even billions of people through the various screens of television, film, computer, and phone. It was only now that I felt the momentousness of this occasion. My belief in the objective truth of this site didn't matter. It had already become true for millions of people through media. Tyler and James were right. This place was a big deal. I was standing on ground zero of the new religion. That is meeting Tyler D. Now, codes of silence, the invisibles, and the invitation to the site. Throughout the day, James and I had took opportunities to compare notes. Was Tyler setting us up? If so, for what reason? Were we pawns in a covert plot to disseminate disinformation? The answer to these questions didn't matter to me. They didn't matter because I wasn't there to determine the truth behind the artifacts, but to observe the formation of belief in the artifacts and to track the various directions this belief took. In the history of religions, there are always artifacts: the Ark of the Covenant, Noah's Ark, the Shroud of Turin. The artifacts are important to believers, and they are controversial for non-believers. They spawn religious communities and, ironically, fictional portrayals. If we were there as pawns of a disinformation campaign, I thought this revealed that powerful interest groups were still heavily involved in the creation of UFO/extraterrestrial belief, a fact that has already been well established. I was open to that possibility and would not have been at all surprised if it were true now. This reminds me of reading Jacques Vallée's diary, Forbidden Science. He literally released his diary, something he never thought he would do, in order to prove that disinformation is disseminated by the government. That's the whole reason he wrote Forbidden Science and released it, was to show this is proof that we know all this shit is real, but there's a huge interest in creating a lot of disinformation around it and suppressing it. Jesus' presence and message were given many different interpretations by early Christians, and they didn't all agree. In fact, they often disagreed with one another. Almost 400 years after Jesus was killed by the Roman government, that very government decreed Christianity to be the state religion, and they put their might behind one interpretation that deemed it universal. Other interpretations became heretical, and those who advocated for them were sometimes punished with ridicule or worse. Witch hunts, Inquisition, bad times. In this respect, the UFO/extraterrestrial belief system was no different. Its message had been managed. However, I was curious to observe how the site and the artifacts informed and influenced the belief system of my research partners. Two scientists who were at the top of their games, the pinnacle of their careers. Each had a reputation built on revolutionary innovation and discoveries that pushed the boundaries of the possible. Their technologies were cultural game changers, and there was no other way to put it. My quest was to understand how their beliefs informed the creation of their technologies and contributed to the larger UFO myth and narrative. The people affecting us believe in the funky stuff, just like us. James and Tyler believed that they had evidence, not just faith, to support their belief in extraterrestrials and the extraterrestrial source of the artifacts and the authenticity of the crash site. Prior to this trip, Tyler had given James an analysis of some of the parts. James knew what he was looking at, and according to him, if this analysis actually corresponded to the makeup of the artifacts, then they were one of two things. They were something that someone paid millions, if not billions of dollars to fabricate, or something made them somewhere other than on Earth with technologies that we did not understand. At one point during the day, James looked at me and asked, why would someone do that? Spend millions of dollars to create these parts and then just throw them here in the desert in the hopes that we would find it? It just doesn't make sense. I know, right? The simplest solution is space aliens. James's track record as a scientist was impeccable. And in part, my quest was motivated by the desire to understand the connections between his belief and his skills. He is one of the leading scientists in the world, and he had the instruments and the technical skill to determine whether the artifacts were genuinely anomalous. He was eager to locate some of them if they remained, or if any remained. How he and I came to travel to the site was an odd story. A few months prior to our trip, I organized a small conference to which Tyler had not been invited on the phenomena. The small closed meeting was unique because it brought together ufologists and scientists with scholars of the humanities, all of whom studied the phenomena of UFOs. The goal of the conference was to compare notes and learn new things from people whose fields were different from our own. So cool. We assumed that the things we would learn would include new data. I mean, such like a meeting of the fucking nerds talking about UFOs and the paranormal. Like, that would be to just like hang out there, you know? Just listen. I'd just be eating and listening. Oh yeah, good idea. The most important lesson we learned, however, was that the codes of conduct that govern academic scholarship are very different from the codes that govern the behavior of those who study the phenomena in any official capacity. This realization was eye-opening for me and would determine the scope and limits of my research. The code of conduct for academics demands transparency. We reveal our sources as a matter of practice and ethics. It is an ethical imperative that guides our work. I found out that the code of conduct for half of the conference attendees was exactly the opposite, and for good reason. Scientists ufologists, are vetted extensively before their employment in the field. That is, when they work for the government or in the private sector on it. Once hired, they take oaths to keep their sources secret. The code of confidentiality extends throughout the communities of people associated with the government who work in specific areas of space research, and particularly in the field concerned with unidentified aerial objects. The one thing that you are not allowed to discuss if you are employed in this capacity is the very thing you study. They maintain their silence for important reasons, one of which is national security. Due to our different codes of ethics, the interface between the academics and the other researchers at the conference was fraught with tension. I learned that I needed to take my new research partners' ethical codes seriously and respect their silence and their confidentialities. If I didn't, I could get some people in a lot of trouble. This realization hit home when at the conference I witnessed a breach in the code of silence. During one of the sessions, an attendee stood up and interrupted the speaker. In the closed academic meetings in which I had participated, this was not typical behavior. Members of the audience, including me, were shocked. The usual protocol dictated that attendees wait until a speaker is finished and then ask questions. I touched the attendee on the shoulder and asked him to wait. He refused, politely. The professor tried to continue, but the attendee lost his polite demeanor and loudly proclaimed that the professor who was speaking had no authority to report his findings. The two men began to argue and disagree with one another. Dismayed at the non-collegial nature of the interchange, I quickly called for a coffee break, while the two continued to argue. As attendees filed out the door for coffee, the two men moved toward me. From snippets of their conversation, I understood that they had both been aware of a research study that was apparently not public, but secret. Each had taken an oath not to reveal the findings from the study, but none of us in the audience knew anything about it. During the break, I spoke to several attendees, and none of the academics understood what had happened. They were so unaware of the code of silence that the others had to observe. It was so far removed from their own fields and ethical codes that the small spat may as well not even have happened. For me, it was just the beginning of an education about the lives of people who study the phenomena from the inside, the invisibles, the people whose names are washed from the internet on a regular basis. Whoa. Their merits and accomplishments are never to be known. They are literally removed from history as if they never existed. On the day after I got back from the conference, I received a phone call from Tyler. Now that I had begun to understand a little more about the phenomena, he would like to take me to a special place in New Mexico where I might understand a little more about the phenomenon's physical nature. The timing of this invitation was odd, and I wondered if he somehow was aware of what happened at the conference. Oh, he was. I was suspicious of him. I told him that I would go to the place in New Mexico if I could take my research partner, James. Tyler said no. He explained that he needed to obtain special permission to take me, and that it was out of the question to take another person. I understood. However, I was not going to go without another person, and James, a scientist who studies the phenomena, was my choice. Plus, James was an academic, and therefore I understood his framework, transparency, and he understood mine. In a sense, James was familiar, and I trusted him. I emailed him and asked if he would go, if Tyler consented. James' reply was an instant yes, probably a fuck yes. Oh, an instant hell yes it was. Oh, you want to go to the Roswell crash site? Yeah. We both waited for Tyler to change his mind. After a few days, I received a note from Tyler. He had warmed to the idea of having James on the adventure. When I told James, he was elated. In the back of my mind, I had known that Tyler would want James to go on the trip because if anyone in the world could analyze a piece of alleged alien crash debris and determine anything about it, it would be him. I knew that Tyler would research James, and he would come to this conclusion. I didn't know that at the time, but Tyler was on a quest to understand the nature of the artifacts, and I was part of that quest. Woohoo! So mystical, just getting a call from this mysterious man inviting you to the Roswell crash site after you have this UFO conference at your house where you invite great UFO scientist minds and non-UFO scientist minds. Very interesting. Interesting story about Tyler. In Encounters, we learn a little bit more about his history with NASA. Now, he was with NASA, and then he left, and then NASA just sought him out. And so he left because of differences with them. He wanted to go pursue his own thing. He felt that, he was being restricted there, which he was. So he leaves. And then guys in suits just track him down. They're like, we want you to come back to NASA. In that moment, he was like, man, I wish I can go back to NASA too. So it's just weird how things line up, just like with DW here. I put off meeting Tyler, even though acquaintances had told me that he wanted to meet me. He was what I call a meta-experiencer. When I started my research in January 2012, I thought that people I would interview and learn about would be experiencers, people who believed that they either saw unidentified aerial phenomena or had contact in some way with the inhabitants, aliens. Or entities. I quickly learned that experiencers attracted people other than just those like me who were interested in learning about their experiences and beliefs. They also attracted scientists. the scientists were interested in what the experiencers saw and how they saw it. It often applied and often applied this information to their own work. I coined the term meta-experiencers. To describe this group of scientists, I cautiously observed them, noting that most were reticent to admit they believed in the reality of UFOs, but they readily scooped data from the primary experiencers. Tyler was one such person, an employee in the space industry. I was suspicious of Tyler because he was different from most of the other meta-experiencers. For one thing, he was very wealthy. I'd heard that he traveled in a private jet. He drove an expensive sports car. He was rumored to be in MMA. What? Oh my God, we got to find out who it is. Who's the scientist MMA fighter? Go forth. Find Tyler. Or mixed martial arts. No, don't find him. Actually, don't. Let's not. Let's leave Tyler alone. Let's let him keep inventing things. No one needs to know who Tyler is. Or mixed martial arts fighter. And to have competed in several publicized fights. Yet it wasn't his wealth or his hobbies that caused me to be suspicious. It was his affiliations. Dang, he wants to be. No, he doesn't. That's the interesting. He's in publicized MMA fights. Was that in his time when he wasn't working with the old NASA? I feel like they wouldn't let him do that because they want to protect his brain. But there were other rumors that he had worked for several government agencies. I avoided him because of these rumors. I know from previous scholars' work that when one scratched the surface of the topic of UFO events, eventually one would find that governments were also interested in the topic, and one might cross paths with agents. The thought of government agents wanting to meet me was disturbing. I know, oh my God, no thank you. Ah! Mostly because of what I've seen on television, yeah, true, which granted was based on stereotypes. I was happy, however, to carry on a correspondence over email, but even that was different from the typical email correspondence. My first communication from Tyler that was not part of an email thread directed to several recipients was a text message. It was the longest text message I had ever received, full of information about how he came to study the phenomena. He sent me videos of what he worked on in New Mexico, Florida, and other places. He also sent videos of his conversations with friends. These were very odd. His friends never looked at the camera, and they spoke as if they were unaware that they're being filmed. Tyler? I quickly surmised that, in fact, they did not know. Tyler was outfitted with various types of cameras hidden in his clothes, disguised as strategically placed on his body, and he was recording everything. I knew that if and when I finally did meet him, he would be videotaping me too. That, among other things, was a deterrent. I mean, yeah, this guy sounds like a freak. Oh, I'm just videotaping everything that's happening around me. Yet, Tyler's personal history was compelling. Through our correspondence, I learned that since the age of 18, he had worked for the U.S. space program. First as an intern, then as an engineer for the space shuttle program. He worked on almost every space shuttle that was ever launched, and he spoke about each as if it were a living thing. He described how each shuttle had its own personality, its own noises and sounds. I fucking love that. Tyler's passion was launching rockets and shuttles, and for anything that had to do with space exploration. He sent me videos of his conversations with several astronauts, just casual conversations. I wondered how they would feel knowing that I, a stranger to them, was watching them have lunch with their friend Tyler while I was sitting in my office at work. I would wonder what she heard in those conversations, you know? That's so... I found it amusing and fascinating. Tyler's circle of colleagues consisted of generals, scientists, and astronauts. He had another set of colleagues, surgeons and venture capitalists. Cha-ching! And he began to share more of his life in this sector. I was confused by his breadth of knowledge and skills. On the one hand, he was an aeronautical engineer, and on the other hand, he was a biomedical entrepreneur. He was a wealthy rocket scientist. It all just didn't seem to add up. One day I asked him to explain the connections between his diverse fields of expertise. Through a combination of videos, text messages, and emails, Tyler explained that part of his mission was to translate the information he learned from space exploration into biomedical technologies. One video featured the CEO from one of Tyler's companies in Tampa, praising him. In one scene, the CEO stood in front of a promotional video for biomedical products. The video featured a photo of Tyler in a blue flight uniform wearing aviator sunglasses, posed in front of a giant rocket. Tyler worked with venture capitalists and with surgeons and medical researchers to implement his visions. He explained that he owns more than 40 patents and that he mostly works from home on his deck in the sun. So sorry, I embellished, not hundreds, 40. I get paid to think and to match up experts who can implement my vision. I asked him why he was interested in carrying on a correspondence with me, a scholar of religion. He said, I have mentors in the space program. One of them, who is now retired, explained that the next discovery in my field is going to come from your field. Woo woo. That's so, like again, it's like, and we've been getting hints of this in all the books we read. Jacques Vallée. What's the major thing this cutie has in his book collection in his home? Books on angels, the demons, fallen angels, religious lore from all the religions. I am at the limit of my understanding of what I could find from a materialist perspective. My mentor explained that mysticism, religion, and consciousness is where I need to go to learn what's next. That's the mind-machine interface. It's the next frontier. Woo! Tyler's career had been going full speed ahead until the death of one of his mentors and friends, the brilliant astronaut Judith Resnick, who was killed when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded in 1986. He recalled this disaster and its effect on him in a video he sent to me while he was on business in Cape Canaveral. In the video, he was standing on a concrete slab at the Air Force Base. He was there to pay his respects to the Challenger's crew and to his friend Judy. This is the burial ground of the Challenger. Pretty sad, huh? The shuttle is buried here in chunks of concrete. Oh, that's interesting. I gotta go. I want to go see that and pay my respects. I hadn't known that this was the ultimate destination of the Challenger. Tyler went on to explain more about that day. Her last hug showed me that on some level she must have known. Anyway, for us on the ground, we were looking up as it launched. We were all excited as this mission had received so much publicity. And the president was watching it too. On that day, we all huddled in a group and stared at the capsule as it left Earth. She soared higher and higher, and we squinted to keep her in focus. Then, well, yeah, we saw the explosion. I instantly felt the shock of pain in my stomach. I knew immediately what happened. Everyone else was in denial. They refused to see it. I don't blame them. Those were our friends. I saw the sparks and the debris start to fall. I could feel my heart and my spirit. They just died. No feeling left, just a gaping hole. I left the group and went down and looked out at the ocean. My spirit and soul called out to my friend Judy. I'm sorry. That is what I wanted to say to her. I watched the wisps of debris floating into the ocean, and I knew I was never going to be the same. Tyler's voice was now strained and broken and trailed off in the video, but he was still filming. I could still see the concrete chunks. I watched the video in silence. Tyler was still recording, but he couldn't speak. I sat and watched quietly. I can still picture myself sitting in my office chair watching. I will not forget that day. Until then, I had been mostly amused by Tyler. This video put an end to that feeling. His sad story revealed itself to me at that moment in its greatness, its largeness. Tyler's story was bigger than Tyler. It was also a part of American history. Amen. Yet Tyler's part in this history would never be known. Tyler was obsessed with recording videos because his story was erased and had to be erased. I didn't know. Probably. The video marked a turning point in the estimation of who Tyler was and what he had contributed and was contributing to a history that ironically was unknown. Oof. I love that. Tyler, unknown hero. To all the other unknown hero scientists out there, we love you. To the Pat Prices, Ingo Swans, Russells and Harolds. Later, Moon Girls. Later, he spoke to me about the aftermath of the Challenger disaster. Like a lot of astronauts and people in the program, I dedicated my life to the program and its success. That means that I didn't have a personal life, and that took its toll. Right after the Challenger accident, my wife wanted a divorce. That and the loss of my friend Judy put me over the edge. I developed heart palpitations that landed me in the hospital for a few days, but things all went better with some medication that I took for a few months. But it was a rough time. I was never depressed and struggling through life, and I had no idea. I was very depressed and struggling through life, and I had no idea of anything about the phenomena. In fact, I was a pure skeptic and didn't believe in anything in that realm, UFO paranormal realm. Someone left a book in my office at work, which had no title on the black cover. Oh, wait, look. Books appearing in your life is a phenomenon. That happens a lot. A lot of people when they're studying things, scientists when they study things, they report this happening. The like random appearance of a book that's just going to open the gates to what you've been researching. It ended up being in my briefcase one day, and I took it out and started reading it. It was Carl Sagan's book on the cosmos and space travel. It was completely different from anything at my day job launching space shuttles. I noticed as I read the book that I was able to settle down and even sleep. Oh, babe, perfect. Cosmos is so good for that. It became my saving grace, and I read it every night. His views of the universe expanded my knowledge and put all my problems in perspective. It was my turning point, and I knew that there was either existing or soon to exist technology that was much further advanced than the space shuttle that could allow for interstellar and superluminal space travel, whatever the fuck that is. A few months later, I started work on a very special facility at the Space Center, which was the next step. I think in my evolution to off-planet experiences. So before Tyler here worked on the Challenger, that tragedy, 1986, year I was born. That Challenger sends him into a spiral, right? And this is where his mind slowly starts opening to off-world experiences. We're not there yet. He's still skeptical. He's reading Carl Sagan's book. The Challenger explosion happened. He lost his wife and his friend Judy. His wife divorced him. His friend Judy died. So he's in his mind is ready, I guess you could say. Tyler's personal crisis after the Challenger disaster led to his discovery of the phenomena, UFOs. As he grieved the loss of Judy and the crew, as well as his divorce, he knew that he couldn't go on working in the program. The realization hit him hard, as his own identity was fused with the program and space exploration. He explained that one day, as he contemplated his departure from the program, a general entered his office and issued a request for proposals for experiments to be run on the Space Shuttle Columbia. As the general spoke, Tyler said, "I had a memory, and it was about this experiment. I knew it would work. It was to test whether or not non-charged material could speak with charged material. This could only be tested in a non-gravity environment. Don't ask me how, but I knew that it would work. I just did." The general, however, didn't think the experiment would work. Tyler did not have a PhD, which was required to run the experiment. As much as the memory of that idea was there as a reality to me, so was the will to get the general to say yes to this experiment. Basically, he thought it was stupid, and so did everyone else. But I did get a professor to agree to help me with the experiment, even though he thought it wouldn't work. He wanted to publish the results and to have run an experiment on the space shuttle. And to him, whether it worked or not, didn't matter. He just wanted to publish, baby. Publish or perish. It was the publication that mattered. The general reluctantly agreed to the experiment, and to everyone's surprise, it worked. Old Tyler D knew it would. Tyler explained what happened afterward, which marked the turning point in his career. A few days after the experiment worked, me and the professor were called to Washington, D.C. I was excited as I thought I would get an award. Instead, we were asked to go into the basement which, by the way, is never good. Imagine getting called in by your boss and you're like, yeah, I'm about to get a reward. Dude, my experiment worked. And they're like, you need to report to the basement. And then your boss is the government and you're reporting into like Washington, D.C. We went in and we all sat down. Me, the professor, a few people who had witnessed this experiment, and some guards. After a few minutes, the doors opened and a 2-star general entered the room. We all stood. He barked out, "Who the hell came up with this idea?" I immediately stiffened with shock. The professor pointed at me. He did. Son of a bitch. At that point, I knew I wasn't getting an award. Instead, I was interrogated. "Where did you get that idea?" the general yelled at me. I could only tell him the truth, that it was a memory. That sounded like bullshit, but it was the truth. The professor confirmed it. Once the general was satisfied that I was probably an idiot, he sent me out of the room. The next week at work, I was given a patent, and $500. I decided that week I would quit my job and to go into business with a surgeon buddy of mine. I decided to take my memory and use it for good. At this point, Tyler and his associates went into business, pursuing the biomedical applications of his ideas or memories. He was successful. He wrote patent after patent and sold his first biomedical company to a public corporation for an undisclosed amount of money. It provided him with enough money to retire, which he did, but his retirement proved to be brief. And it's like, so the Tyler, he has no PhD, trained himself, has been working with NASA since he was 18, started as an intern, and he considers all his ideas memories. He doesn't sit there and like he does. I mean, of course, he's a scientist. He researches. He lives his life. We'll learn about his method in here. But the memories come to him, and he knows this experiment will work. And in the biomedical field, he has over 40 patents in the biomedical field, things that probably help us every single day, things that have advanced medicine. But, you know, his name is scrubbed from the net often because of who he is. So, but yeah, it's just the memory thing. He's not, and that just gels with a lot of other famous scientists when they talk about their biggest idea. A lot of the times it's like, oh, you know, this idea was like beamed to me. After a few months, I was bored. I knew I had to go back into the space program. It was my core passion. As if on cue, as I was passing through an airport, 2 men approached me and handed me a card. They asked me if I wanted to come back to the program, and on the card was a phone number. They told me to call it. So I did. I know that sounds like it's straight out of a movie, but that's what happened. Oh, it's so freaking cool that happened to you. Hey, man, call the number. When Tyler returned to the program, things had changed. He explained that he was now connected to a source that he believed was part of an off-planet intelligence. He felt that it had been with him since a few months after he saw the Challenger explode. After the disaster, I started working in a very special facility at the Space Center. It was the next step in my evolution of my knowledge to off-planet phenomena. What he learned there wasn't typical information. He wasn't shown anything and didn't read about anything. But he believes that he was in the proximity of something that emitted energy and frequencies that changed the way he thought. His desk was next to a square room that was covered in concrete and metal. There was something in there that either emitted frequencies or signals, and they didn't want those to escape. They didn't want those signals to get in. Or they didn't want signals to get in. Sorry. I never knew which. It was a mysterious place, and we weren't allowed to talk about it. This gels so much with a lot of stuff that we read and with stuff people have come to the chat and talked about, knowing about frequency programs, how things could materialize and dematerialize just with sound. So the fact that Tyler now, he's paid to think, remember, he has over 40 biomedical patents. He's had successful experiments on many of the space shuttle launches. He's sitting next to something that amplifies his thought that the agency he works for, NASA or whatever government agency, owns and knows about. But Tyler just has no idea. He knows that there's just something in this freaking room. That room, Tyler felt, zapped him with energy that changed the frequencies of his body and his thoughts. It was after this experience that he began to have more memories of biomedical technologies. In the program, I started to find myself on jobs where I interface directly with the phenomena. I know its language. It does speak to us in space. I don't know who is responsible for putting me on these jobs. I think that somehow they are responsible for it. Yeah, that whatever that fucking thing is in the room is beaming that shit to his bosses too. In the program, I started to find myself on jobs where I interface directly with the phenomenon. I know its language. It does speak to us in space. I don't know who is responsible for putting me on these jobs. I think that somehow they are responsible for it. My own direct boss doesn't know what I do. This is how the program works. Tyler explained that his connection to the off-planet intelligence helps him create biotechnologies. The technologies he has created seem to me as if they originated in an episode of Star Wars or Star Trek. One of the applications of his inspiration is a material that has been etched at the molecular level with information. The etching codes the etching codes the material with information that the human bone reads as itself. Tyler created a fucking language that we could etch on our bones that our own bones can read. It is then incorporated into diseased human tissue and bone, which helps the body recuperate from cancer and other illnesses. The body being programmed to heal itself, because everything we need to heal ourselves is already inside of us. Tyler showed me a picture of one of the patients who was healed through this treatment. Jane is a radiant young mother of twins. She had bone cancer and was told that she would never walk again. Tyler sent me a picture of a thank you card she had written to him, noting that she had believed she would never walk again, let alone care for her young boys. And now she was doing both. At this point, my curiosity was piqued. Tyler, his life, and his current pursuits intrigued me. I decided to meet him. If he was an agent, he certainly was an accomplished and productive one, and I didn't feel as if I was in danger. He had shared information about his family, so I knew he was a family man as well. Additionally, as he and I continued our correspondence, I had uncovered a lot more historical information about the beginning of the Russian and the American space programs. This information helped me contextualize Tyler's place within these institutions. And we know from the histories we've read in Mind Reach and the other book we have, Psychic Abilities Behind the Iron Curtain, that during the birth of the space program, there's also the birth of the psychic programs for both governments. I mean, come on. It just makes sense. Cosmic mind, cosmic material connection. As above, so below. Many of the scientists and astronauts who work for the space programs most likely do not believe in extraterrestrial intelligence or that humans are in contact with that intelligence. But the founders of both the Russian and American space programs did. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, regarded as the founding father of rocketry and aeronautics, believed that ethereal beings or non-human intelligences were trying to communicate with humans through symbols. He wrote this: We are made as the ethereal beings existing beyond our dimensions of recognized reality. These higher beings are in communication with us, reading our thoughts and sending us messages through celestial symbols, which most of us do not even perceive, much less understand. A genius is one who comprehends and channels these messages from higher beings into technologies, products, and even art. And this reminds me of the really famous Indian mathematician who believed that a Hindu goddess was giving him all of his math, algorithms, equations. And a lot of his equations weren't solved until now, and they're all true and real. And that's an ethereal being literally giving him the info. Tsiolkovsky perhaps regarded himself as one of these geniuses, as he discovered the equations that would later help scientists develop rockets and take humans off Earth and into space. The American space program had its own version of Tsiolkovsky, Jack Parsons. Oh, one of my favorite little weirdos in American history, Jack Parsons. The father of American rocketry. Don't let anyone tell you it was Wernher von Braun, because Wernher von Braun will tell you that it was Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was uniquely American in that he collaborated with Aleister Crowley and L. Ron Hubbard and spent time both launching rockets and engaging in provocative rituals in the Los Angeles desert. Now, you know, L. Ron, he's the con artist who started Scientology, and then Aleister Crowley, he is the dude who considered himself the great beast, ran around in Parsons' time in the deserts of California and in Great Britain. To him, they summoned demons, and they contacted a group called the Thelma. And the Thelma actually helped Parsons with some of his rocketry stuff. I don't know if we'll get into Parsons here too much, but he participated in these rituals, and then he did rocketry experiments. He died in a giant explosion out in the desert, and his last words were, allegedly, his last words were, "But I'm not finished yet." Too bad, homie. But, so that's Jack Parsons, father of American rocketry. You see playing with a bomb here. A little foreshadowing. Parsons also believed that he was in contact with extraterrestrial intelligences. He launched his experiments on days that were ritually significant to him, such as Halloween, cool, and his pre-launch rituals paid homage to the intelligences with whom he believed himself to be in contact. His life ended tragically. He was 37 when one of his rockets exploded, and as he was experimenting in his garage, and he perished with it. A few months after his death, there was a very public UFO sighting over the White House. Parsons' widow and friends attributed the sighting to his death. In keeping with the code of silence that permeates the industry, most of the astronauts and NASA employees I interviewed didn't know about this history, or if they did, they didn't want to talk about it. Yeah, no one talks about how Parsons was a total weirdo, and how von Braun on his deathbed was like confessed to his nurse, if there's ever an alien invasion, it's going to be a fake alien invasion. That's just the government doing its thing. It's going to be a phalian invasion. But that's a story for another day. The mere mention of it embarrassed them. When I asked Tyler what he thought of Jack Parsons and Chbosky, he expressed admiration for their genius, but was genuinely shocked and surprised when I described what they believed and their rituals. I had begun to understand Tyler as being part of a lineage of people like Chbosky and Parsons. People who believed that they were in contact with non-human intelligences and believed that those intelligences were directing their paths and seeding them with information that directly led to the creation of innovative technologies. Whereas the former, men focused on aeronautics, Tyler had a dual focus on aeronautics and biotechnologies. I also began to understand Tyler as a contemporary version of the famed Colonel Philip Corso. Ooh, who's this? Colonel Corso was a military man who claimed to be an agent whose task was to seed private industry with crass extraterrestrial craft under the guise of Russian or Chinese technology. The hope was that the private industry would reverse engineer the technology and provide Americans with an edge in the global marketplace. His book, The Day After Roswell, oh, I have heard of this guy. The Day After Roswell, okay, appeared on the New York Times bestseller list. The book fueled a modern version of the myth of Prometheus, the notion that non-human advanced intelligences, gods even, provided humans with advanced technology, but has also fueled a conspiracy theory that simultaneously explained the origins of modern technology and accused the government of covering up the secret of extraterrestrial life. And ain't that just it, probably? Doesn't that just seem like that's it? Like, that's probably the story, right? The real one? This history is such a... We really don't know it. All you know is like reading someone's fucking diary from 100 years ago, and you just, that's their opinion, that's their perspective. But I mean, significantly, technology has often been described using the language of the supernatural. Computer programmers are wizards and devils. Computer programmers are wizards and devils, and computers assist users with technological tasks. Social media can and will read your mind. A much-quoted statement by Arthur C. Clarke that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic solidifies a division between technology and magic, while also establishing their connection. The assumption is that if we were sufficiently advanced, we would understand that something that appears magical, such as an advanced propulsion spacecraft, is not magical at all, but technological. But something far stranger and more complex was at work here, as reflected in the lives of the founders of the space programs and in the work of the new contemporary version of Colonel Corso, Tyler D. It was a fusion of magic, or the supernatural, and the technological. And somehow, silence was the key to understanding this connection. Whereas the original Colonel Corso functioned as a contemporary Prometheus and was punished in the public court of ridicule, the contemporary Corso, Tyler D., worked silently and invisibly. His invisibility ensured his success and was somehow key to it, which makes sense. Like, Corso comes out trying to tell us the truth about Roswell, trying to tell us, guys, it crashed. We have the info. And what did we do? We're like, oh, you're a nut. Get out of here, Corso. No one believes you. So Tyler D and the new generation, they have to work in the shadows and in secret, because we're just not going to believe them. That we as humans are programmed not to believe the extraordinary. The powers that be do a great job of helping that along, but it's just kind of our natural thing to survive. It would be gnarly to accept all this. But yeah, I think him staying invisible is key to it. He probably just wouldn't be doing his thing if he was writing books and out in the open about the off-world intelligences he was talking to and all that stuff. People would just be like, no, thank you. Like the colonels and stuff who didn't want to do his experiment about uncharged material talking to charged material. All right, now let's meet Tyler in person. At this point, my expectations of Tyler were running very high, and he did not disappoint me. We arranged to meet in Atlanta at the annual conference for my discipline, the American Academy of Religion. Even though I was sold on Tyler's legitimate place in the space program, I was still suspicious of him. Mostly because I knew he would be outfitted with cameras, but also because I was still unsure exactly of what he did and why he was interested in meeting me. I convinced one of my colleagues, Jeff Cripple, to accompany me to the meeting. Jeff's work on religion had helped me understand the research direction upon which I had embarked, and I hoped to rely on his input and assessment of Tyler and his occupations. I had primed Jeff for the meeting, telling him of my concerns. I also knew of an experiencer who knew Tyler. His interpretation of Tyler was informed by his belief in extraterrestrials and his Christian beliefs. So I wasn't that surprised when he told me that Tyler was probably an angel, which to him meant that he was a person who was part human, part extraterrestrial. Ooh, now that, dude, that's Cripple. I gotta read his books, dude. Yes, Jeffrey Cripple. That's where the next discovery is coming from. That's what Tyler's mentor said earlier. You are just about to meet someone who is not human, he said. He is older than both of us, but he looks 20 years younger. I don't know what he is. And remember, Tyler was a young man in 86. So it's like, yeah, it's crazy that he's older than both these two scientists who are about to meet him, yet he looks younger. What are your methods? What's your skincare routine, bud? We were to meet at a restaurant near the conference, but it was jam-packed with scholars of religion. The wait for a table was over an hour. Jeff and I decided to wait at the bar for Tyler. I was nervous, and Jeff picked up on my unease. We laughed. Soon a tall, thin man with thick brown hair appeared at the restaurant window and peered in. It was Tyler. The window was mirrored glass on the outside, and as I turned, I looked directly into his eyes, and he combed his hair and checked his appearance. He couldn't see me. He then walked in and recognized me immediately. I noticed the details of his clothes. He was extremely well dressed in a classic suit and a dress shirt with cufflinks, Gucci. His attire and demeanor distinguished him from the scholars of religion who were mostly disheveled and were milling about and eating lunch. He introduced himself and we shook hands. I couldn't tell how old he was, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, but he did look extremely fit and youthful, just as the experiencer had said. Upon learning about the wait for lunch, he immediately called his hotel, the Ritz, and secured a table for us three. Tyler turned out to be very charismatic in person, just as he was virtually. He laughed easily and was comfortable talking about his family as he was talking about science. His natural charm impressed Jeff, who invited him to his house in Houston for dinner to meet his wife and family. I had hoped Jeff would be a little reserved to keep Tyler at arm's distance, but Tyler's charisma proved to be too powerful. That's right, baby. And was no match for any suggestion that perhaps Tyler was using it for a purpose. None of my warnings were heeded. This would be just the first case where Tyler's charm and social abilities were in evidence. Every person or group of people to whom I introduced him was taken by his demeanor. He was some kind of rock star, and that just added to my suspicion of him. Tyler's protocol. At lunch, Tyler explained that he had a specific protocol for connecting with off-planet intelligence. Oh, yes! Oh, never mind. Let me get serious about this next session. This next section. So Tyler's protocol. We're about to learn how Tyler communicates with this off-world intelligence. Now, in a lot of the books we've read, people have mentioned their methods. Itzhak Bentov, he mentioned his method because that's where he got most of his book. The Mechanics of Consciousness is more beamed to him from an off-world intelligence. So buckle up. Maybe this is a protocol you could work into your life and start communicating. Who knows? Mine as well. Tyler's protocol. At lunch, Tyler explained that he had a specific protocol for connecting with off-planet intelligence. It was a physical and mental protocol, and as Tyler explained the details of it, Jeff and I nodded in recognition. Many religious traditions advocate a physical protocol, like yoga, meditation, or contemplation. That involves the body and the mind. Yeah, totally. Quieting your mind, finding a quiet place, just listening to the silence. Get to know yourself. I love that that's the first step. These traditions, it is believed, help practitioners connect with the sacred. Tyler's description of his own protocol reminded us of religious practitioners and these traditions. And it's wild that Tyler's doing these things without any knowledge of any sort of religion or spiritual practice. He's only talking to the religious folks because his mentor was like, hey, you've done all you can do in the material world. It's time to check out the spiritual world. That's where the next advancement is going to come from. And that was a retired other scientist dude that Tyler looked up to. I basically believe, and this is Tyler, I basically believe, and there is evidence for this, that our DNA is a receptor and transmitter. It works at a certain frequency. The same frequency, in fact, that we use to communicate with our satellites in deep space. Humans are a type of satellite, in fact. So in order to receive the signals and to transmit the signals, we have to tune our physical bodies and DNA. Because of this, I make sure to sleep really well. I use an 8+1 rule. That is, I sleep for 8 hours, wake up, and then make myself go back to bed for an hour. That 1 hour to top off really makes or breaks my day. I barely drink alcohol as it interferes with my sleep, and I never drink coffee. Coffee really messes up the signal. Oh, interesting. Well, for him, right? Well, maybe, because you feel really good after coffee. I listen to Tyler as I sip from my coffee cup. Same. Trying to fight the exhaustion that comes from cramming too many activities into a 3-day conference. Jeff and I took turns asking Tyler more questions about his protocol and his connection with the off-planet intelligence. How does this help you with your connection? And what does that connection feel like? I asked. I also have to be in the sun. So I wake up, and the previous night I will have gone to bed a little dehydrated. Then I get an extra hour of sleep, and I go out into the sun. While I bask in the light of vitamin D, I drink a tall glass of water, which flushes my cells and rehydrates them. This is better than coffee. It is at this point that I can usually feel the connection. I know I've established a connection when my thoughts that show up in my mind don't seem like my own. They are unfamiliar. With practice, you can feel the difference. Okay, yeah, makes sense. So there we go, and that is key. Because really, he's just tuning his frequencies in his own way so he could really feel these thoughts. But I think this kind of stuff happens all the time where thoughts feel like they're beamed to you. That's because they were. I love this idea of DNA being a transmitter and a receptor, because it is, and us being satellites because we are. That just makes, yeah. So that's what he's saying. He's just able to feel this, because we all have those moments, I feel like, where an idea is it's just given to you, and you're like, where the fuck did that come from? He just is able to open these floodgates and really read them and just let them all flow into his mind. Okay. So you recognize these thoughts as different from your own? Jeff asked. Yes, but you also have to understand that the environment also wakes up and validates that they are speaking to you. See, I can explain it this way. I get a thought and it comes out of nowhere. It comes with a certain feeling, like a hit. Then usually within a few hours, something will happen that will validate that it was them and that I should act on it. Here's an example from Tyler's life of what he's talking about, where he gets beamed information, then something validates it. A key event of my life happened because of an errant email. I was sending a note to a friend and accidentally sent it to the wrong John, who was a former neighbor from years ago. The wrong John read my email thinking I was asking him to work with me to fly an experiment on the NASA KC-135 vomit comet about capacitors. So he developed a one-page concept and sent it back to me. I was like, who is this and why is he sending this to me? I didn't know anything about pacemakers or capacitors, nor did I email him my thoughts, which I had earlier in that day. Well, long story short, he emailed me back and said it must have been an errant email from me, and from there we kicked off a new project and flew it. And he used that data and knowledge at his company to develop a longer lasting capacitor for pacemakers. So pacemaker folks, Tyler D got the capacitors in there so it lasts a lot longer for you. Tyler D and his former neighbor John. What's more, what I learned from him about pacemaker capacitors in that process helped me understand and connect some dots of how off-planet craft operate, given that they used a highly charged capacitor of sorts in their electrogravitic machine. So you're talking about synchronicities and coincidences, I asked. Maybe in order to make the right call, you have to be in tune with your environment and tune your DNA to receive the signal, and then pay attention. Be on the lookout for confirmations, and then act on it. The accidental aspect of Tyler's protocol brought to my mind the biochemist Carrie Mullis. Carrie Mullis! Oh, yes! Oh, we're going to get Carrie Mullis' story right now. Now, this is a cutie right here. Carrie Mullis, Nobel Prize winner, Japanese National Science Award winner. This is him looking cool in his TED Talk. Looks like he's listening to someone who's asking him a great question. So this here's Carrie Mullis. So the accidental aspect of Tyler's protocol brought into my mind the biochemist Carrie Mullis, who had discovered the highly influential polymerase chain reaction and won the Nobel Prize for the discovery in 1993. He also had an anomalous experience that he referred to as a UFO encounter, although he was very careful not to conclude that was what it was. I was struck by Mullis's description of his own process of creativity and its similarity to what Tyler was telling us. So before we get to his process of creativity, she mentioned his UFO encounter. His UFO encounter, he's up in Mendocino County. He's walking, that's here in Northern California, not a beautiful spot. He's walking around his property. It's nighttime, or it's the sun setting. Dusk. Is that dusk? Yeah, dusk. It's dusk. Walking around, enjoying himself. As the sun sets, it gets dark. It's now evening. He's continuing his journey. He notices something glowing by a tree. And even though it's glowing, he still shines his light on it. He sees what he can only describe as an electric raccoon. An animal that seems to be just electrified, emitting light. He keeps his light on it. The raccoon looks at him and goes, "Hi, doctor." And Dr. Mullis is like, "Hi?" And then, boop, blacks out. Next thing he knows, it's morning. He's walking. He's still upright and walking on his property. He thinks it's weird because he's not covered in dew. And if you had spent the night out in Mendocino Farm, it's very humid, or there's a lot of, dew in the morning, so his clothes would be wet. But he's completely dry. He can't explain this experience. It actually pisses him off, so he goes back to the place where he saw the electric raccoon, and he freaking shoots it up. Bah, 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 bah. So that's Kerry Mullis's UFO encounter. But now let's learn about his creative process. So this is Kerry Mullis talking about his creative process. Creativity is when you are trying to figure something out and something else keeps intruding. You finally give into it, and it turns out to be the answer you were looking for. Perhaps something is lost, and instead of looking for it, you let your hands lead you to it with your eyes closed. You might be looking something up and find the wrong subject, and it turns out not only to be related, but to be exactly what you were after. It's not an accident. It was the inevitable. And it all makes perfect sense after the moment, but it's unexpected. That's how creativity happens. The focus beam on your consciousness is very narrow, but you have a creepy sense of what is right behind you. Tyler's protocol was similar to what I knew from several researchers within the UFO community. Within many of these communities, the name for this contact is download. It describes the process of connection with off-planet entities. And Moon Girl, the scientist who we talked to in DW's second book, Encounters, she describes the download. And she's one of the mothers of the internet and of the current version of AI. The download describes the process of connection with off-planet entities. Researcher Grant Cameron writes about the download experience and suggests that creativity does not necessarily stem from a high IQ or a special talent, but instead comes from the ability to tap into non-local intelligence. He said that he originally intended to write a book about what he called the disclosure by alien force that humans are not alone, but instead the focus of the book turned to be the process of the download. Blink. Bye, Carrie. Nice seeing you, Dr. Mullis. Have a good one. This is Grant Cameron talking about the process of the download. Many modern musicians are very interested in UFOs and extraterrestrial life. As that book neared a final first draft, the whole focus changed. It became apparent that it was more important to talk about downloads and inspirations. What was happening to musicians became only a small part of the story. Following a lecture on the alien music connection in Boulder, Colorado, some in the audience maintained that it was the devil and evil forces that were influencing modern music. Somewhat taken aback by this criticism and the old idea of a battle for men's minds and the forces of good and evil, I had to sit back and re-examine my worldview. I grew up in a home where my mother was a church organist for decades. That inspired me to see if the composers of the church hymns experienced the same downloads and inspirations as modern musicians. It turns out that they had, absolutely. That meant that if the devil was behind the downloads and inspirations in rock and roll, it appeared that he had also compelled the church music as well. Well, I mean, look, if we really want to talk about the things like devil, God, good and evil, in all religions it exists, in all backgrounds it exists. It is the conflict that keeps the world going. In science, it's just the opposites. It's just different ways to explain what the fuck's happening on Earth. This like battle of good and evil is just the battle of life. So I feel like that's exactly what he's hitting on. So of course, like, if there's bad influencing something, there's good influencing something. There's always balance. Like Tyler, Cameron believes that the intelligence behind the download is non-human. He also utilizes the language of quantum mechanics. The theme of non-locality permeates many discussions of the download and processes of extreme creativity. Heather Berlin, a neurologist at the Icahn School of Medicine in Mount Sinai, offers an analysis of the creative mind that supports the idea that creative individuals experience their innovative ideas as external to themselves or as supplied by external agents. So I think that a lot of what's happening in the brain is happening outside of awareness. And when we have our sort of conscious brain highly active, it's kind of suppressing a lot of what's going on outside of itself. Sometimes when people are being creative, they say it almost feels like things are coming from outside of them when they are in this sort of flow state. we're starting to understand a little bit more about that state. And it seems to be that when people are being creative in the moment, that the part of their brain that has to do with their sense of self and self-awareness, self-consciousness is turned down. It's called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. If you think about it, a similar pattern of brain activation happens during dreams or during daydreaming. That's right, because we are accessing the beyond. When we dream, you're going places. Dream shaman can meet each other in dreams and report back. Or some types of meditation or hypnosis where you lose your sense of self in time and place. It allows the filter to come off so that novel associations are okay. You know, dreams don't all make sense. That's where creativity comes in. Significantly, Berlin's research might suggest that creativity does not originate from an external source, although some creative subjects like Tyler experience it that way. When pushed Tyler to explain how this method works, he also resorted to the language of quantum theory. Observation makes things real, he said. He paused and looked away and then continued. I don't know why it works. It's more important to me that it works. Amen. You saw the pictures of Jane. She can walk. She can now care for her kids. I can't spend my time thinking about the how of the process. I just use the process because it works. Let me tell you about a room where I work. It is a special room, outfitted with the latest technologies. It's a smart room. We put the best scientists and thinkers in the world in the room. And then we just let them think. There is a complete sense of freedom in the room. Nothing that is ever said in the room is laughed at. We could talk about a purple unicorn flying through space on a pickle. No one would laugh. The point is this, that some of the most innovative technologies we have and use come from what goes on in that room. In that room, we dream the impossible. We then make it possible. See that phone near your coffee cup? I assume you use its technologies. Jeff and I looked down at my pink iPhone. That room? Jeff asked. That room, Tyler said. Your iPhones, people, came from Tyler and his buddies in that secret room. When lunch ended, Tyler picked up the entire check. A few weeks after our first in-person meeting, I reached out to Tyler. I sent him a text and asked him how he was doing. He responded back with a picture. It was a picture of a snifter of brandy and a partially smoked cigar. Celebrating, I asked? His response was, yes. He had sold a company and the money from the shares increased his savings account significantly. It would have been a wonderful day for me and I would have been celebrating with family and friends. Tyler, however, was alone in his laboratory with his artifacts, a cigar, and a snifter of brandy. A true man of the craft. Now we are back in the desert. Back in the desert. Now, has anyone seen... I unfortunately, I know this goes way against my street cred. I've never seen X-Files all the way through. So, the final season of X-Files, does anyone remember that scene on the Mesa? If you do, that was based on the actual Roswell crash site. Tyler says they probably had an insider on their production team that helped them make it look exactly the same. So they showed us the actual Roswell site in a way in that first episode of the last season. Back in the desert. Tyler and I had heard James yell. He was on top of a small hill and waved for us to come. He found a part, Tyler said. We walked over to where James was standing. He was examining a small metallic object and had been identified as an artifact by the metal detector. At that point, both scientists went into collection mode. Tyler took out a plastic bag and a label. He photographed the specimen and labeled it with the date, and he also photographed where it was found. Then he put it in a special bag and he carried for the occasion. We took a moment to process the find. In my mind, I was still entertaining the possibility that the parts were placed here for James and me to find. But James found this particular part lodged in a crevice between a bunch of rocks in a gully that had certainly looked to me like a nesting place for rattlesnakes. It potentially had arrived there from a washout of the stream, unearthed after years of laying under the dirt. He had reached down through the rocks to get the specimen. Evidently, James, who was wearing a long leather gloves, was a trooper for the cause. The day was almost over, so if we were to find more parts, we had to look more carefully. Tyler and I decided to team up and make the process more efficient. He swung the metal detector low on the ground, and I carried the shovel and poked around to try and find any parts that the detector might have missed. Much of what we found was normal metal. As we neared the mesa, Tyler's metal detector started to beep loudly. We got excited. I came with my shovel, but he had already bent down and picked up a very large specimen. It was a metallic piece like James's. We yelled to James, and we all looked it over in the sun. Tyler believed this had been part of the craft's exterior. At the end of the day, we had found several metallic artifacts. At this point, night was falling and it was getting dark and cold. We headed back to our hotel. Later at dinner, we discussed our next steps. Tyler warned us that because the parts were metallic, we can get stopped by airport security, should we carry them back with us. James agreed to take all the parts with him so he could study them. Thinking of being stopped at the airport, I agreed to let James have the items that I had found. Besides, what could I possibly do with them? The day after our foray into the desert was sunny, clear, and beautiful. We were all elated from the proceedings of the previous day. I felt James's excitement and Tyler's sense of accomplishment. James had the specimens and couldn't wait to analyze them. Tyler had brought 2 scholars to the site, 2 people with widely divergent skills and methods, who could potentially help him understand what he had on hand, what he had. On the long drive to the airport, we exchanged many theories. We were all well acquainted with the theories of Jacques Vallée, the famous researcher, astronomer, and computer scientist. Vallée's approach addressed 3 aspects: the physical aspect, which Tyler represented, the testimonial aspect, which was represented by experiencers, and the social aspect on how belief in the phenomenon persists, regardless of whether there is any verifiable evidence to support it. Whereas Tyler and James represented the first 2 aspects, I represented the third. We arrived at the airport and Tyler sailed right past security, past first class, past economy class, and out the other side. He seemed to be literally beyond the law, whereas James and I were not. James and I walked slowly through the long lines and we waited to get searched. As we neared the TSA agents, we both became quiet. I made it through the line without incident. James did not. So Tyler, again, another evidence to how he truly is an untouchable scientist. This motherfucker just breezes through airport security. He doesn't even have to stop. Probably shows a badge. He's just allowed. I worked at an airport a long time ago. I was a baggage thrower, and you got a little badge, and you can go to all the all the restricted places of the airport. I'm assuming he has something like that just lets him breeze through anywhere. James had put the artifacts in his carry-on bag. As the bag moved slowly down the conveyor, carry-on, come on, dude. Slowly down the conveyor belt and through the x-ray scanner, the whole thing suddenly stopped. The contraction shut down with a loud beep. Everyone scrambled, and suddenly James's line was redirected to another scanner. James's bag had to be rerun through the scanner. I looked at my friend and saw the horror on his face. As I exited the line, I found Tyler in the airport cafe looking for us. He and I sat down and watched our friend James' bag going through the scanner again. "Don't worry," Tyler said to reassure me. "He'll be okay." The bag rescan went without further incident. Security searched James, his suitcase, his jacket, and everything that he was carrying. By the time he made it through to where Tyler and I were standing, sweat drops glittered on his face and forehead. "I need to sit down and have a drink," he said. James told us later that he had been terrified that the scanner would break again, and TSA might take the piece he had out of his bag and begin to question him as to what it was and why it shut down a TSA x-ray machine. I ordered James a glass of water, and we all sat down and recovered. Although it had been stressful, this last episode seemed to seal the camaraderie that had been building for the duration of the trip. We were an unlikely team. 2 scientists who believed they had physical evidence of off-planet intelligence, and a professor of religious studies. It was unlikely, but being with them felt right. Tyler and James were perfectly willing to share their knowledge with me, even though they knew I was agnostic about their artifacts, meaning she didn't really believe in aliens yet. To be honest, both James and Tyler felt that the science had to be the answer to the potential origins of the aircraft. Until then, it was exciting potential that might lead to an understanding and potentially an artifact of Hierophany. Remember, an artifact of extreme sacred importance, where belief comes from. They never felt that I disrespected them, and they respected that I, just like them, was on a quest. Their quest was different from mine, but we were united in our desire to know more, as much as we possibly could know about the phenomenon. And that is chapter 1 of American Cosmic. We got to spend some time with Tyler D, and we got to learn his methods. American Cosmic, UFO, Religion, and Technology, aka It's All Real. Thank you for joining me for the Sunrise Book Club. We'll be back possibly tomorrow with more of American Cosmic, but we'll probably most likely definitely be back Saturday with chapter 2. And chapter 2, we learn all about James, the scientist that was with her at the Roswell crash site, and his moniker, Master of the Multiverse. So that should be fun to get into. Hope you enjoyed the journey through aliens, creativity, and the download. I'll catch you later.